Alright guys, hey listen, I've got some vibrators on the track here, and none of them have the chassis. I sent all my chassis to a buddy of mine, Mark. I believe he's in Pennsylvania if I'm not mistaken. Come to find out, he is the vibrator guru of all time. He knows what to do to get these things to run, and he sent me a few videos. You may have seen some of these already, but he sent them to me on my phone here. I just put together a quick video. I can't wait to get my chassis back from this guy. He really knows what he's talking about. And I've always said, hey, listen, the vibrators are kind of doggy. They're really kind of doggy no matter what you try to do. Well, I was using DC power packs. Both my power packs are DC. One of the first comments Mark made to me was, you got to use the AC, at least 24 volt. And he's done some really neat things. He's got, and I'll show you the schematics. He gave me a schematics to where you can wire two of the transformers, two of the power packs up with two of the speed controllers, you know, the ones that have the steering wheel on them. And he shows me the schematics, how he did it, so he can actually give the cars a little bit more juice, or actually a lot more juice. And the guy does some phenomenal work. So here, I'll just go ahead and start the videos now. He's working on 4 of my slot cars, and he's taking us through step by step what to look for, how to clean them, how to oil them. The guy is absolutely amazing. All right, guys.
All right, let's see what you sent me here, Jeff. Let's see what we got. One, 2 Vibe chassis. Let's see what's going on in this package here. Truck chassis. Total of 4 chassis, 2 truck chassis. Okay. Alright. So just for the record, I'm going to take these as is. Just for the record, just going to take them as is and take them over here to my layout. Place them down, and I just want to document how they perform, if at all, from the jump out of the package here from you. Oh, wrong lane, intelligence. Clearly we need new wheels. But not a bad performer. We will definitely improve on that. In any event, he's running. Second truck chassis. He's also running. Our new wheels are in order, and a tweak of a tune-up. He's not a bad runner. We'll get him moving for you. We'll get him moving for you. Alright, you're giving me some nice chassis to work with for sure. Some nice stuff to work with. And the fourth. Alright, new tires for sure. Alright, I got some chassis here that are going to be perfect donor cars to soup up for you. So thank you, Jeff. I'm going to get to work on these as soon as I can, and I'll keep you posted. Alright, first thing I'm going to do is take this guy apart. Obviously. And we're going to clean the contacts. Push rod out of there. An early red push rod. Tires are dry rotted, get rid of them. The drive gear looks like it's in good shape. We're going to move it off of the edge here, give it some play. Oil this up. I'm going to put a pair of gel claws on the back. You know, a nice rolling chassis. Now we're going to clean the contacts. A little sandpaper here. Fine grit. In that contact there, obviously. This one here. The brush plate looks to be in good shape. Clean the contact point. Shine it up. Clean that one there. Shoes are pretty good. You want to make sure they're even. Make sure those shoes sit even. Bend them a little bit as needed, not too far. Make sure they're level. Guide pit back in. And this brush plate back on. Pop that in there. And screw that back down. Most of you know that, that's obvious. Next thing we're going to do is put the push rod back in, and we're going to make sure that's the right length that we need for this particular brush plate. Here's the actuator reed. It's in good shape. We're going to bend that just a little bit. I usually take my needle nose pliers here up the top, and I just bend that up just a tad. Just a tad. And what that's going to do, it's going to give the stroke a little bit of a distance. I'm going to check that out. Let's put these screws back in. And I don't tighten them all the way down just yet. Because I want to see the relationship here. You barely want to have that touching. I tend to push forward, all the way forward against the screws, and push down on it to see where I'd be. And because we bent it, and then when we tighten the screws, it's going to lift naturally. Again, I'm pushing forward as I'm tightening. And that gives us no sound there, which is fine. We'll get that great glide when the power's cut off, but when that actuator reed comes down towards the coil, press it down, it's touching that drive gear, so we're going to get some good play there. Now this is critical. You look at the profile here, and you press that actuator reed down and see the contact here on the brush plate. See how much that's actually unbreaking the contact. Now, because of the wear of the brush plates over time, that arm can bend, and that's why a critical piece of this motor working is actually the length of the push rod and how much it opens that contact point. You don't want it to open too much. You'll hear a lot of clacking. You don't want it to not open enough. I've had cars where it wasn't opening enough, and just a new push rod at a little bit of a longer length made the performance just night and day. So I actually use raw pasta. I use a piece of angel hair pasta and cut it to length depending on the chassis. Now this might be working just fine. And again, take a look at how high that reed is. And that's going to be drawn down a little bit. The stroke is a little bit longer. We're going to get some performance out of this. Now, when you place the body on top of that, make sure that I use washers, little washers here. I use these little washers. And I place that on the rear screw post to make sure that the reed doesn't hit the bottom of the body. So let's take a pause here and we'll go check the performance. Okay, here's our chassis. We just tuned it up and oiled it. And let's check out its performance. Night and day. Night and day. The bending of that reed, give a little bit of longer stroke. The bending of that reed to give it a longer stroke, and the fact that it doesn't rub upon braking, giving you that coast, that glide. Wow, that's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing. That's actually a lot of, that's got a lot of kick. That's a good one. So the weight of the body will actually help that stability. And that's a good looking vibe. And that was simple. All we did was bend the reed and position it where it's got good interactivity with the drive gear. And again, you got to find a sweet spot. I lucked out here on the first attempt, and I can't overstate the relationship between between the push rod and the brush plate and the top reed and the drive gear. It's a simple mechanism, and make sure nothing's binding. Often I find, even after some running of these things, I find that the drive gear tends to move left or right and bind against the chassis. So you want to make sure that nothing's binding up. And needless to say, obviously when the body's on, you want to make sure nothing's rubbing. And again, keep the axles oiled and the contacts clean. And these babies perform. These babies can perform. And sometimes it'll stop because the dust will get in between the contact. And your first attempt to getting your car running again is just to pry up, and don't overbend, mind you, but just pry up that arm of the contact brush and blow. It actually states that in the manual. And 8 times out of 10, that'll be your problem. Just dust in there, and you're back off and running. So there you go. We got a very high-performing chassis for minimal. What did I spend? A minute and a half? 2 minutes? That's a thing of beauty. That's the thing. And AC current, I can't state that enough either. Yeah, they run on DC, but they run like dogs on DC. They were designed to run on AC current. Make sure you got an AC current and you have at least 24 volts. 24 volts is what the power pack came with, but hey, some of these chassis, each coil is different, and if you have the ability to have a power source that can increase the volts, you can go above 24, maybe up to 30. But depending on the chassis, I'm telling you, look, I'm filming and driving at the same time, which is why I'm not able to really concentrate all too well, but it's got sorry about that. All right, Jeff Ryan, there's chassis number 1. And all you'll need for that is a pair of gel claws. Okay, Jeff, here's your chassis at like 24 volts. And I got this thing floored. And it's hardly moving. Now, you'd say, oh, I have a terrible chassis, but with the wiring diagram I showed you in the second auxiliary, I'm just going to go over here to the second controller, and I'm going to increase that. And I'm going to come back here and operate this controller again, and watch. So with more volts, obviously, you get more pleasure out of these things. So, you know, these vibes are really cool to play with. They just need more volts, some of them. Not all of them, but some of them. So I strongly suggest that you get 2 power packs, 24 a piece, and wire them in tandem like I did, or if you buy some AC power source that's just variable voltage and you can crank it up to something in the range of 30 plus. Okay, here's chassis number 2. We're going to take this apart and clean it. But a couple of observations here. This was sent to me by Smoking T-Jet's Jeff Ryan. And again, I look at the relationship between the brush plate contact arm. I put it on the profile and I press down on the top reed and I see how much that's opening, breaking contact. If you look, that's actually perfect. You want it to open up to break contact, but not too far because you want that to snap right back. But the play on this reed, we're going to raise that a little bit because that's too much for me, hearing that. I'm going to raise that so we hardly hear that at all or not at all. We're going to look at the relationship between the perpendicular end of the reed here and the way it strikes that drive gear. We observe whether the drive gear teeth are in good shape, and they are. We're going to oil the axle here, take it apart and oil that or whatnot. But look, and the tires are old and rotted. I use gel claws. They're wonderful for the T-Jets. Other racers don't like them for their applications, but for the vibrator application, they're fine. I got a T-Jet hub here, and I got a vibrator hub here. You can tell by the thickness of the flange. The thin one's the Vibe. The heavy one, or the thicker one rather, is the T-Jet. The brush shoes look pretty good. We're going to make sure that they're equidistant. We're going to adjust those just by bending. We're going to oil up the axles. We're going to bend the reed. We're going to put it back together. We're going to sand the contacts, lightly sand the contacts after removing the brush plate. We're going to put it back together, place it on the track, and check it out. You want to make sure those shoes are even. Turns out they just need to be bent a little bit and adjusted. They look good and even now, and we're no longer sputtering, and we're moving pretty well. That's 2 chassis that are pretty good. And that badass coast. You gotta love the coast. Alright. 2 chassis down, 2 more to go for Jeff Ryan. Okay, so I just put this chassis back together. I oiled the axles and I pushed the hubs in closer to the chassis so there's no play. I cleaned the contacts all over the place. But most importantly, I took my needle nose pliers and I gripped the reed and I bent it from the screw holes and bent it back up. You can see the lift there. Again, you're going to need a washer that I use here for the rear screw post, so the reed doesn't vibrate against the inside underside of the body. But you don't hear anything here, and that's great. You're going to get that great coast. The thing is, when you press down on the reed, when that circuit is closed, you'll hear it. In any event, we're going to check out the performance right now. Alright, fingers crossed. Okay, he's sputtering a bit. We're going to need a little bit more with this guy. Alright, we'll get him moving. Hey guys, I got a truck chassis here I want to tune up. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, I'm going to press down on the actuator reed and see that bottom brush arm contact open up, and this one's not. So I can tell you right now, instead of bending the brush plate contact, those things are scarce, rare, they don't make them anymore, so that's why I use the pasta. That's why I adjust the push rod length to alter the interaction between that arm and the push rod. It's obviously cheaper to use spaghetti. That's why I use spaghetti. In any event, I'm going to take it apart and service this thing. Again, we look at this. We look at the drive gear, and those teeth seem to be in good shape. These tires are all dry rotted, so we'll get rid of those. We're going to take this reed off. Now, as I've mentioned in previous videos, it's all about how the reed strikes that drive gear. And the thing is, about this design, this would be a better design if instead of screw holes here, if they were actually slots, allowing us to move or slide this plate forward or backwards for the interaction between that blade and the drive gear to be better. But because you can't, unfortunately, sometimes to get that sweet spot, you got to bend this. You got to bend this, and it's fragile as all get out, as you can appreciate, and that'll tear easily. So you have to be careful, and that's certainly why I have purchased as many new old stock actuator reeds as I could get, and I got a nice supply. But in any event, we're going to move on, and we're going to oil this chassis up, and we're going to sand the contact points. Put new tires on there. And new tires. Alright. I want to watch the play there too. Push those in a little tighter. Okay, again, nice rolling chassis. Nice rolling chassis. Take a look at the contact brush plate, and of course clean those contacts. Polish that up in 2 spots. Take a look at the shoes. Make sure they are even. Bend them as needed. And then for what it's worth, I take this tool here, and I'm sure all you mechanics out there have much better means of doing this, but hey, I'm primitive, but it works. And I'm just gonna shine up those shoes. All right, again, make sure they're even. They look good. All right, I'm gonna pop that back on the bottom. Oh, get the guide pin in there. That would help. And another thing that's kind of needless to say, make sure the inside of the coil is clean so the push rod travels freely in there and isn't corrosion or dust or whatever the heck might be in there after 40, 50 years. Now, as I've done in previous videos, I'm just going to bend this slightly. Even those pliers, I bend from the left side up. I'm actually bending from the rear and just holding steady with the needle nose pliers, but I lift up. And now I'm going to place that back on. Okay, so I got the actuator reed back on there, and that's still a little much for me. So this is what I was mentioning. If these were slots in the reed, I could slide it forward, but instead I'm going to pry up a little bit with my finger, and I'm going to push on that blade forward and try it again here and work it so I can barely hear that sound. And again, this is just delicate work. Okay. Let's check it out. Alrighty, check out the performance here. See how we're doing. All right, well, my work is done here. One thing I want to mention that I didn't mention in the previous video are the pickup shoes. You want to make those even, pardon me, but you don't want to make them too high. They need to sit just about 1/8 of an inch off of the plate. If it's too high, you'll notice your car bouncing. So you want to readjust those. And also, since the rear axle of the Vibes is not threaded, sometimes the wheel hub will be loose. And I've noticed, the poor performance. I've stopped and realized that, and tighten that up somehow. I'll put something within the hole just to tighten it against the axle, and it made a world of difference. So I guess Aurora corrected that, obviously, when they improved everything with the future rear axles being threaded to make sure those hubs sit on there tight. But on the Vibes, sometimes they don't. So basically, I think I've covered pretty much everything relating to the Vibes. And hey, I enjoy them. They're temperamental, yep, and they're frustrating. But hey, this is my hobby, and I'm loving every minute of it. All right, thanks, guys.